Does God exist? Does God still interact with us today?
Here's the good news. God is alive and showing up in people's lives today in the 21st century. These are the stories of how he reveals himself and is working in the lives of real people through the miracles, the mayhem, and the mundane of life.
Hello and welcome. I am Hollis Moore.
And I am Lori Spiker. We are two friends whose faith journeys have become intertwined as we felt called to share God with the world in a unique and different way. So here's our podcast.
By sharing people's stories, we transform how we relate to each other and how we relate to God. Be prepared to experience the unconditional love of God in new and unexpected ways. And be prepared to proclaim, "Oh my God is awesome." Welcome to the Oh My God Pod. Hello and welcome to the Oh My God Pod. I am your co-host, Hollis Moore. Wanted to thank all of our podcast listeners and our video cast watchers, as you're probably watching us for one of the first times. It's something new for us, super exciting. And so thanks for being with us in whatever form or fashion. Lori, just wanted to say welcome. How are you doing today? Good to see you as always. My friend in Detroit. I'm in Denver. So what's happening over there?
Hey, how's it going?
Share with us who is joining us today.
All right, everyone. I'm really excited to introduce you to Bethany Mingione. We're acquaintances. You guys have heard, hopefully, Allie Greff's interview, a few weeks ago. And so Allie actually introduced me to Bethany via Facebook. Allie sent me a message over Christmas and was like, "Lori, hey, listen to her story." It's just kind of a whole God story, how I came to land my eyes upon one of Bethany's Facebook posts, and I reached out to her and she said yes to share her story. And so I'm really excited about this, you guys. So let's get into it. Bethany, how are you? And welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm good.
Will you just introduce yourself for our listeners? Where do you live? What do you do? All that good stuff.
So I live in Novi, Michigan. I am 34 years old and I am married. I have a beautiful 7-year-old little girl and 2 bonus kids. My husband had 2 kids before me. So I have a 19-year-old bonus daughter and a 12-year-old bonus son. So I get the joy of being a mom and a stepmom and getting the best of both worlds.
I like how you call him bonus son. I haven't heard that before. That's neat. And then Bethany, what do you do for work?
I have a handful of things. So I nanny 3 days a week. I am the early childhood events coordinator with my church. So I head up the nursery, the infant through preschool department with like events and all the childhood stuff. And I run a wellness business through Young Living, just seeking like natural, non-toxic, clean products. I kind of share my why in my story a little bit, but it was a pursuit that began when I became sober. So
awesome. Okay. And then before we get into your story, Bethany, we like to always ask our listeners, how did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about like your church or faith upbringing.
So I was actually raised in a very, very strong Christian, biblical-based household. I was raised in Assemblies of God church, the same, like I was baptized at an early age. I was dedicated when I was born. My dad led worship. My parents were in choir. They led drama. They led marriage classes. Like we were very, very involved in the church growing up. I went to a private school for part of my childhood. So my faith was very ingrained in me growing up. So that was amazing. But so I really decided when I got older that I wanted to learn the other side of the world. And that's kind of where all of my challenges began. But I had a very, very healthy, strong, biblical-based childhood.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have two younger sisters. Our middle sister was adopted into our family at birth. We were very blessed with that. And then my youngest sister is, so they're like 6 and 7 years younger than me. And they both have one little kid that I get to be an aunt to. So that's a joy in my life for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. How was middle school and high school for you?
So that was when like my struggles really began. I began with my mental health struggles in middle school. I started self-mutilation in middle school. I just really started pursuing my own path, trying to find something to make me happy. So middle school and high school was really hard for me. I was sexually assaulted when I was in 10th grade. So then that kind of began a whole nother journey of my struggles. But I was very insecure. I was very like in the feeling alone. I just wanted to fit in for most of those years. So I don't look back on those years as very fond years of my life.
When you were in middle school and high school, did you where were you at with God at that point?
I really went back and forth. So being that I was raised in a very strong household, there were a lot of expectations of my faith. And so part of it was the people pleasing in me. And I wanted to do everything that my parents wanted me to do. So I feel like now looking back, I know now looking back, I didn't have a personal relationship with God. I had my parents' religion pretty much. And I really went back and forth, and I went quite a few years where I can kind of say I lived a double life. I was in public school for part of my high school, and then I transitioned to a private school after the assault. But I would go and I would have friends and do this at one place, and then I would go to church, or I would be at home and I would have a whole nother life or persona in a sense to basically please the people that I was around at the time. And I think that partly it was part of my insecurity, part of the people pleaser in me, but part of just not even knowing who I was or who I wanted to be, and just wanting to be something that was going to fit in the place that I was at.
Bethany, did your family help you address your mental health issues?
They did. So in middle school, when I was self-mutilating, I journaled about it, and my parents, being the good parents that they were on top of things, they knew that something was going on. And so at one point they did go through my room and they found my journal, and they found that dark secret of my life. So I did enter therapy. I was in group therapy for self-harm struggles. I did individual therapy. So yeah, I started on antidepressants when I was young. So I think the struggle started around when I was 14. I don't remember. I started on antidepressants when I was in high school. I know for sure. But I did have an encounter in high school with a Christian woman that I really looked up to. She led a prayer group, and she had the belief that Christians should not be on antidepressants, that was not biblical. So in my senior year, I trusted her and followed her feedback and went off of my meds. And that was where some of my more intense struggles, that was my senior year. So I went off of my meds, and then my pursuit of anything that could make me happy or feel accepted really just went wild. And my senior year and after my senior year, things really went downhill after that, because I wasn't even on my meds at that time.
So can you take us to that point in your journey? What did you do after high school?
Yeah, so after high school, I joined cosmetology school. I really had no desire to go to college. I was pretty much raised with the intention that I was going to be a housewife and a mom. That was what my mom was, and that's what I grew up wanting to do. So I had like this mentality that it's pointless to go to college because I don't want to do that. But I loved hair and I loved all the things girl. So I went to beauty school, but I also started waitressing, and I started making friends in the secular world and started partying. When I was 18, in some of my party stages, I was actually raped at a party, and I started dating this guy that was a drug dealer, and I just thought it was like the coolest, most exciting adventure ever. And I was living at my parents'. They found out, and they kind of gave me an ultimatum, like, you are going to break it off with him and stop living like this, or you cannot live with us. And I was 18, so my sisters were like 11, like they were young. And so part of it was for my parents, for my parents' mindset, it was out of self-preservation and protecting their household, protecting the other two kids that were in their home. Like, we can't have this going on. And I was very set in my ways. And I said, well, I'm not quitting what I'm doing. This is my life. I'm going to do what I want. And I'm stubborn. So that's what I did. And so I had that option, or was told, well, you need to move out then. So I did. And so I moved out. I was like still trying to go through cosmetology school, was living with this boyfriend, was doing all these random things just to like fit in and try and live my life. You only live life, YOLO, like all these very immature choices. And I got to a really, really low point. I was still not on my meds. I was not in therapy. And I remember wanting to break it off with this boyfriend, but knowing that that's where I was living. I had nowhere to go. And I was feeling very, just kind of like at my wit's end. And so there were a few very suicidal tendencies, and I was able to move back home with my parents under circumstances, and I had to go back into therapy. And in the midst of that, my suicidal issues really came to light. So I entered a psych ward, and I was there for about 30 days, and I was discharged like 2 days before Christmas. So, and it was like right before my 19th birthday.
Bethany, were you addicted to drugs at the time?
I was not really addicted to anything hardcore, but I was addicted to the partying. I was addicted to boys. I smoked weed like all the time, like day and night, morning and night, like all the time. But now looking back, it's like hard for me to even like see like how it just got so far from where that was.
So the treatment center that you went to for a month was primarily for mental health, not addiction.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was just a hospital psych ward. It was not a rehab. Like when I moved back in with my parents, I stopped smoking and I stopped doing all of those things. I wasn't like physically addicted like I became later on in life to other things. It was more like a mentality, like just needing it. I was self-medicating with the marijuana. I've always struggled with my anxiety and my depression, so they were calming things. They helped my anxious thoughts and my feeling alone and my feeling, depressed.
And so when you moved back in with your family, there were conditions, and was church part of that?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Church was part of that, which also like I still was in the mindset that you can't force me to go to church. I'm not your child anymore. Like I'm not a child anymore. And so like it sounds so awful, but I would go and get the church bulletin and then leave. Like I wouldn't even stay for the service. Like I would go and be like, yeah, I went. Like, see, I got the church bulletin, but like nobody knew. I wasn't even like sitting through service. I just walked in the door, was like, oh, church bulletin. Okay, worship starting, gotta go. But yeah, that was a requirement, like therapy and being on my psych meds and stuff.
So then you eventually moved to Florida. Will you kind of walk us through the decision for that?
Yeah, so after I was discharged from the psych ward, I went back to my parents' house. And again, they were trying to protect their household and the two younger kids that they had. And so some of the conditions of me living there were really challenging for me and my mental state. And I didn't feel like it was helping my recovery from the hospital and getting back into my independence. I really wanted to work back into having an independent life and, you know, doing my thing and finishing beauty school and being an adult. So I also struggle with seasonal affective disorder. A lot of people know it as SAD or SAD. So in the winter, it's much more common up here where we have like yucky winters, but in the winter my depression like gets really much worse. And that's when a lot of my declines with my mental health have intensified. It's just really been a pattern. I'll do really well, and then holidays will end. My birthday's the beginning of January, and come like end of January, February, March, where it's just like dragging on, gray, cold, gloomy days, that my depression just like gets so much harder, you know, to manage. I have to be much more intentional now, I've learned. So I had the opportunity to move down to South Florida. My aunt and uncle lived down there, and they offered me to come live down there. So I finished up beauty school, and I thought, this will be the perfect solution. Change of scenery. I can leave all of these awful, you know, relationships behind, you know, like the bad friends that I had created, you know, like I'm going to start new. I'm going to have, you can't be depressed in Florida. Like it's Florida, you know, like vacation every day. Right. And so I thought it was the perfect opportunity, and I moved down there. So right after I turned 19, I moved down there and lived with them. And I was with them, I want to say about 6 or 9 months. And then I ended up getting my own place. And it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity that I could have made good use out of it, but I didn't. And I chose to not make good choices. So it ended up becoming a bad thing for me, but it could have been really good if I had been serious about having a healthy life, you know. But South Florida is not the most ideal place for somebody with mental health challenges and addictive tendencies that's insecure and is a people pleaser to live.
So
you know?
what kind of line of work did you get into?
So when I moved down there, I had every intention of taking my cosmetology schooling and doing hair. I thought it would be the perfect place to do that. All of my experience was in waitressing. So I was like, well, initially I'll just get a waitressing job, and until I get on my feet and get started with the hairstyling situation, which never ended up happening. So I started waitressing, then I started bartending. Then in the bar scene, I ended up, and I was like 19 years old, I ended up meeting a girl whose name was Bethany. So the bartender thought, oh my gosh, I have to introduce you guys. You have the same name. And I don't, you know, it's the bar scene, I guess.
Yeah.
And so then she was sharing with me that she was a dancer in a strip club, and sharing how much money she was able to make at night and what a great opportunity it was. And as a 19-year-old girl, the thought of making that much money and having the acceptance and approval of men and the attention of men, which was always something that filled my insecurity cup, I guess you could say. I was like, sure, I could do anything. And I had obtained a fake ID by that point. So I was already able to go and drink at 19 years old and get away with it. And so I was then introduced to some much harder drugs. I started snorting cocaine and snorting like Oxycontins, and I was introduced to drugs that I never even knew was a thing. Like, oh, here's a blue pill. Okay, what we're going to do is da 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 da, you know, and this is how you're going to feel, or not even tell you how you're going to feel, but you just do it because that's what the other person is doing. And so hanging out with her, she was like, here, you can borrow some of my outfits and try it out for a night and just see what you think. And so she gave me something to take to ease my nerves, and gave me an outfit to wear and gave me some shoes to wear. And we went in the back door of the club, and I had my first night, and I was able to drink, and I didn't feel a thing, and I don't remember a thing. But it was that exciting lifestyle that I thought was like the perfect solution to fill my empty spaces in my life, I guess.
So Bethany, it sounds very similar to, dating the drug dealer back in Michigan. Was there ever a time when your conscience was like, oop, this might not be the right path, or were you just not really tapped into that side?
I was not even tapped into that side of reality at that point. No, I started dating one of the managers at the club, who, come to find out, was a hitman. So I ended up in a very unusual relationship. We had a very unusual lifestyle. I ended up getting my own townhouse that I could afford because I was making a decent amount of money. And it was just a lot of sleeping in till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, get up, go, and my job was to party. I was getting paid to go to a nightclub, flirt with men, and do these things. And then afterwards, and in South Florida, the bars don't close at 2. There are clubs that are open till 4. There's a club that was open until 8 a.m. So I would go to work, finish working at 2, and then I would go and party afterwards. I had a fake ID. I had this really cool boyfriend and protection, and I wasn't on any medication. I wasn't in therapy or anything. So this was my self-medicating. I was very addicted to painkillers by that point. That was really when that part of my addiction elevated a lot. Down there so this would have been like 12 or 13 years ago. So before, it was when like pill mills were like a really big thing. When I say Oxycontin, the common average person doesn't really know what that means, but that's like top grade. Only cancer patients really get that kind of prescription nowadays, and it's really regulated now, but it was not back then, so it was really easy to obtain. And it's basically prescription heroin. It's very, very strong, and I was very addicted to that at that point.
Bethany, how long were you in Florida? How long were you addicted and in this life before you ended up moving back up here? And how did that all kind of happen?
So I was in Florida for maybe 3 years. I turned 21 when I was with that boyfriend and in the clubs. And then about just under a year after that was when I ended up moving back. I got into a very bad car accident and totaled my car. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I woke up unconscious in the hospital, finding out that I had been hit 3 different times and by a semi truck by like 3 different areas. And because I was unconscious, they did not breathalyze me. And I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse because I was definitely under the influence. But because I didn't have any charges or any repercussions from that. So, in a sense, I was like, woo, got off with that one, because I was driving under the influence on a nightly basis, with my partying lifestyle, and I was driving home all of those nights. So I got away with a lot, but it gave me that bad confidence that I could get away with a lot. And so I continued to do it. So I had broken up with that boyfriend at that point that car accident happened and got clean on my own. I just remember trying to detox on my own. I didn't even know that like AA or NA was even a thing back then. I just wanted to get clean and just kind of, I don't even know, I wanted to get my life together. I didn't want to dance anymore, but I didn't have any desire to do anything else. So my depression got really bad. I started drinking a lot, but I had like this mindset that I was going to get my life together, but I had no clue or plan on how that was even going to happen.
So at this point then, Bethany, are you maintaining any communication with your aunt and uncle or your family back up north at all? And do you have any friends that are not in the lifestyle?
So my relationship with my parents was really strained when I moved to Florida. We went quite a while without talking, and then we would talk, and then we wouldn't talk. I know that I was not living the life that they wanted, and so I felt like the black sheep, and I knew I was a disappointment to them. So I didn't have like even much motivation to have a relationship with them because it wasn't a positive thing for me. And I know that it was not a positive thing for them either. My aunt and uncle, I did have a relationship with, but I covered up a lot. I'm sure that they knew a lot, or, you know, more than I wanted them to know, but they were more of a support system, just wanting to help me be successful, but not really knowing how. I don't think anyone really knew how to help me at that point, especially because I was so discreet yet manipulative, and I lied about a lot of things. So I think I didn't even really have the willingness to honestly get the help that I needed, you know.
But you did somehow get into rehab at this point, did you? Or are we not at that point yet?
No, we're not
Okay.
at that point yet. So that was after I was back in Michigan. So
okay. How'd you get back to Michigan?
So I got in that car accident, and I had like no intention on working in the bar scene anymore. And then I stopped making money, and things just got really challenging for me. So my parents approved of me moving back home to Michigan to live with them and start again. I knew I needed to get out of this environment. So again, this was just like when moving to Florida, it was like, okay, change of scenery. I'm going to get away from this place and these people and run away from this and start over again, which isn't something that works. But I didn't know that at the time. So I drove myself back up to Michigan, and I was still drinking a lot. So driving back up, I thought that I would just, and I was stressed. I was very anxious about moving back in with my parents. So driving back up, I got a bottle of Bacardi and stopped at Burger King, or I think it was Burger King, got dinner and got a large Coke and dumped my Bacardi in the Coke and was going to drive back up to Michigan to move back home with my parents. And somewhere along the lines, I blacked out and ended up in someone's driveway. And next thing I knew, there were cop cars all around me, and I was in jail because I was driving under the influence, and multiple people had called and reported my vehicle as driving crazy on the freeway. So in Ohio, somewhere in a random town, I got a DUI on my drive back to move to Michigan in my car. I had to call my dad, right? This is right after my parents are like finally agreeing to accept me back and let me move back home and try again. And here I am calling them from the jail cell saying, hey, you know, on my drive back up from Florida, I got a DUI. Can you come get me? So my dad had to drive late in the middle of the night to come and get me out of jail. So
wow.
I ended up losing my license for like 2 years after that. And Ohio is no joke when it comes to
it's
DUIs.
Not.
That's
right.
like the last state. I mean, don't ever plan on getting a DUI, but if you're going to, don't do it in Ohio. They did not mess around. So I had quite a lot of probation and fines, and I had to do a weekend safety driver course and all sorts of stuff to get my license back. But
Wow.
I still was able to move back with my parents, and I lived with them. But of course, there were conditions because they had to maintain a household with 2 other children that they had to protect. And,
Yep.
but I was still in the mindset of I'm going to live my life, how I'm going to live my life, but I'll do this to appease you and then do what I want to do in secret. So I was still like hiding alcohol in the room and doing things I shouldn't have been doing. So I still was not living an honest recovery.
So move us on into, because you did get sober for about 3 years, right?
Yes. So I started dating my ex-husband, who I had known before I moved down to Florida. We had been close friends before then, and he wasn't involved in some of my intense partying. He was more of a help. I don't know how to explain it, but we maintained our friendship when I lived in Florida. So then when I moved back, he was somebody that I continued my friendship with, and we started dating again. And I eventually moved out of my parents and moved in with him. And then when I was living with him, I was working in the restaurants and started using painkillers again, because I've found in my experience that they are very easy and readily available in the restaurant industry. So I got addicted to the painkillers again, and I had been dating him and living with him for a year or so, and just kind of got to my last rope. And I remember, and I like said this before, like the best decision I ever made when I was high was to look up rehabs. And so for the first time in my addiction history, I started looking up rehabs, and I found a rehab that was amazing. And I went there and I got clean, and I ended up maintaining a recovery for a few years. In that time span, I came back from the rehab and we ended up getting engaged and married. And that was when I had my daughter. And so I had my daughter, Ava, and I was clean. I was going to meetings. I was very involved in my recovery. I was working the 12 steps, and I started working at a mental health facility as a peer support specialist, or some people know the term peer recovery coach. And I became certified through the state of Michigan doing that. And I loved that job. I loved it so much. I ended up working under a state funded grant for co-occurring disorders. So that means somebody that has a mental health issue and an addiction issue. So I specialized in helping addicts with mental health issues getting their life on track. And I loved it. I was on fire with that job, and it was great for me, and it was great for my recovery. The grant ended up ending. Grants are only like
Approved for so long?
Approved for a period, and then they have to go up to get reapproved, and it was not reapproved. So my job was no longer needed, and it's not like I got fired, but my position was not needed. So I did not have that job any longer, and I just needed to get a job. So I started looking anywhere. I had the history that restaurants were not the healthiest scenario for me, so I was avoiding that. And it was basically just like applying anywhere. And I ended up applying at a drugstore and at Walgreens. And you take like a entrance test to kind of see where your skills are. And I tested very high on it. So they said, hey, you can be more than just a cashier. You're qualified to work in the pharmacy.
Oh my gosh.
And they said, you would make so much more money in the pharmacy. And I thought, and at that point, I was very strong in my recovery.
Okay.
I was confident in my recovery.
Okay.
I had a few years clean. I had a life that I loved. I had a daughter. And I thought, there's no way that I would do anything stupid. There's no way that I would relapse. I can do this. And so I accepted that position, and I made it a little while. I did, but I think I had that false sense of confidence. And so there came a day where I had a headache or something small, and I was filling a prescription, and I was like, well, I know this would help. Nobody's going to notice if one's missing. And so I took it. And then a day or two later, I was like, nobody said anything. That was easy. So I did it again. And it became a daily thing. And it became more than one a day. It became pour a handful in my hand, in my pocket, fill up this prescription. Okay, one for you, one for me kind of thing. And my addiction was right back there. I mean, it's a physical and it's a mental struggle. So at that point, it was like not even in my control to be able to not do it at that point. I was so far in.
Did you know that the Oh My God Pod is non-revenue generating? That means we make no money from the podcast, but it does cost us money to produce the show because we have tools and technology that we've invested in and we subscribe to monthly so we can deliver these awesome stories to you. Well, we now have a Venmo account that makes it easy for you to support us. Simply go to the Venmo app on your phone and search for the @ Oh My God Pod. And when asked, enter the 4 digits 6006 when it asks you for the last 4 digits of the phone number. Please consider supporting the podcast with a donation to offset our production costs. It can be a one-time donation of $20 in honor of our inaugural year in 2020, or a $5 a month reoccurring donation. Or if you're interested in sponsoring an entire show, please contact us. When you partner with us and the production costs, you can be confident that you are contributing to spreading God's love through our guests' stories. We may not all have the courage to come on the air, but each of us can do our part to further God's kingdom in this new and unique way. Thank you in advance for supporting the Oh My God Pod. And Bethany, you mentioned that you were going through a 12-step program. Was that AA or NA?
I was an NA. Yeah.
And is that faith-based like AA is? Because I feel like there's a faith component, and I wanted to ask kind of about that aspect of your life at this point in time.
Yeah, there was a faith component. I did end up in that time period going back to church. My ex-husband and I did start going to church. I did dedicate my daughter when she was born in the church. We were pretty involved in it. I went to MOPS at that church, which is Mothers of Preschoolers. So it's like a mom's group. We met monthly or something and loved it. I made Christian friends. I had very good relationships. I was improving my relationships with my family. I felt like I had a strong support system. I had a sponsor that I was working the steps with. I had a lot going for me, which is part of what fed into that sense of confidence that, no, I have all this support. I'm going to church. I'm doing this. And still that secret part of my life, once it came back, it was secret. My ex-husband, who was my husband at the time, didn't even know any of it until I got busted. So even he was like, had a veil over, his eyes. I was very good at my manipulation and my lies. And it was something I was really ashamed of and something that I didn't want, but at the same time, something I couldn't just like not do because I enjoyed it so much secretly,
So, and at that point, Bethany, it's a physical addiction, you said, and a mental addiction. So at that point, when you're addicted to them again, what happens to you physically if you don't take a pill?
So physically with the pills, it was like sickness. It was weakness. It was nausea. It was
Okay.
struggling to, in the physical and in the mental sense, struggling to get through my day. So I would have obsessive thoughts of when can I get some, or how can I get some, or how can I
Okay.
get through my day? I couldn't motivate myself to get anything done if I wasn't taking them as I needed to.
Okay.
I would get the shakes, cold sweats. I couldn't sleep at night, restless leg syndrome. So trying to do it detox on my own was like impossible, in my head. And especially to try and do it without my husband finding out.
Yeah.
Would have noticed and known what those signs were. And then it was like, well, then my secret will be out. So I just kept doing it.
So
And
how
then
long?
I was just going to ask what happened once
Yeah.
you were discovered at work. What was the next thing that happened?
So I was at work and was getting ready to go on my smoke break. I was smoking cigarettes and I got called into the office and completely unaware of anything that was about to happen at that moment. And as always happens in pharmacies, the DEA does audits on a regular basis with these kinds, with all medications in the pharmacies, but especially narcotics. And so I got called into the office and called out on what I had been doing. And they said, we have over 1,200 pills missing. And this was over a period of some months, but a large amount. And they said, the cops are on their way and you're busted and it's time to come clean. And I got arrested and I was physically addicted at the time. And I had to withdraw in the jail cell, which was awful. So you're like, it's not to be gross, but you are like sick out of both ends. Like I was like puking in this gross jail cell toilet and had to call my husband at the time and say, hey, I was stealing all these pills at work and I'm addicted again and all of this awful stuff. And my daughter was 2.5 at the time. So that was quite the challenge. Walgreens was very good to me. They had had a negative experience with somebody with a similar situation a few months before me. And she ended up, after she went to jail, she ended up overdosing and dying. So the corporate was very gracious to me and they really wanted to see me do better and be successful. So they offered to lower my charges. It should have been a federal major charge, and they lowered it to a misdemeanor and offered me to go into drug court so that I would be in therapy and kind of get my life back on track, because they really wanted to see this, my family, my life get turned around. They didn't just want to see me get punished. They were very gracious to me in that aspect. So I took the drug court opportunity and so I had to go to rehab as part of the drug court requirements. I went to a rehab and stayed there it was like a 30-day, stint or something. And then I had to go through probation after that, and I had to do random, almost daily, drug tests and breathalyzers and group therapy and individual therapy, and everything cost money. And eventually, a few months into the program, I just was overwhelmed and I didn't want to do it anymore. So I quit and I dropped out of drug court, and I just told them I wanted to take my jail time and just be done with it. I had a couple of times where I'd gotten into trouble. If you get into trouble with drug court, like some of the consequences are like, oh, you have to do a 24-hour stint in jail. And so I had done that like 2 or 3 times. And I was like, well, this is silly. This is impossible for me to do this for I don't remember, it was like 2 years or something. There's no way I can be perfect all the time. I should just go do my jail time and get this over with. So I did. And I was not thinking it through very clearly, because when I did, it was December 23rd, so 2 days before Christmas. I was still not thinking properly. So I went in and I just said, I'm dropping out of drug court. I can't do this. Just send me to do my jail time. And at this point, my husband had already filed for divorce in that time period. And so I went and did my 30 days up in Clare County. They sent me 3 hours north because Wayne County was booked, was like full. So they sent me 3 hours north on a snowy December evening, 2 days before Christmas, to do my jail time. So I spent Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, my birthday, all of that in a county jail with a bunch of random girls.
And so, Bethany, you mentioned before the experience at the pharmacy that led you to relapse, that you were heavily involved in church. Where was the faith community at this time? And it didn't sound like you mentioned a relationship with God. It's like you had all of the things about Christianity and the church, but it didn't seem like you were really talking to God at this point. So I just wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, so I was very involved in the church, but I don't think I even really understood what it meant to have a relationship with God at that point. Growing up my whole childhood, it was always, you do this and do this and do this and do this. And so it was often my parents' faith it was all actions. It was never like a feeling. And so I think I was still kind of in that mindset that this is what you do. You go to church and then you do this and you go to MAPS and you have these friends, and all my intentions were good in that aspect, but my heart wasn't completely understanding what Christianity really means. And that's a relationship ultimately. And I can see it now. And once I learned about that, now looking back, I can see that that was a big error. But at the time, I thought I was doing everything right with God. But I wasn't with a personal like journal like I do now and read the Bible. And, it was just more like, this is what you do when you're a Christian. But I was way more involved with my meetings and that aspect also. So I had a good group of girlfriends, like mom friends from the church, but I probably pushed them away in that time period when I had gotten in trouble and started pursuing, started going through the divorce and everything started going downhill. So I think part of it was shame and guilt and just like unworthiness, because I didn't truly understand, what a relationship with God was.
Sure. And those are all the strongholds that the enemy just latches right onto.
Yeah.
So yes, just thank you for clarifying that. Move us ahead a little bit in once you got out of jail and your marriage dissolved, correct?
Yeah. So when I was in jail, that was when my ex-husband moved out and got his own place. So up until that point, we were living in the same house, but in different bedrooms because we had a young daughter at the time. So when I was in jail, he had moved out and gotten his own apartment. So that was really when my mental struggle went downhill that I wasn't anticipating or preparing for. So I came back from jail and I suddenly wasn't a mom half of the time. I was sharing my daughter, and before I was sharing my daughter with somebody in the same house. So she was still there all the time. And I was still mom all of the time. And now she was not there all of the time. She was there. And then the other days of the week, she was at her dad's. And so I had to get a job. So I got a job in a restaurant. And That was the only thing that I knew how to do. But still, the restaurants were really a bad scenario for me. So I was still able to access things that I shouldn't have gotten into. And I hadn't learned my lesson. I went to jail, I served my time, closed my case, and I was done with probation. I was done with everything. And so it was pretty much like off the hook. And so having my daughter not there 100% of the time was mentally really hard for me. And I kind of had this feeling like I can have two lives. Half of the week, I'm a single, not mom. I don't have this mom responsibility, and I'm single, and you know what I mean? And the other half the time, I can be a responsible mom. So I started going out to the bar on the nights that I didn't have her, and I started taking pills again. And that was when my heroin addiction began. One of the girls that I worked with in the restaurant introduced me to heroin, and it was much easier to obtain. It was much cheaper, and it was much stronger. So once I was introduced, it's like Satan. It is the most evil thing that I can ever explain, like 100 times more than the painkillers that I'd been exposed to before. And I had no idea what I was even opening myself up to when I opened myself up to trying that. But once I tried it, it was all pretty much downhill from there. So
And then you overdosed multiple times after that, you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I thought at first, like, oh yeah, this will just be something I can do a couple of days a week, you know. And I was a recovering addict. I had years clean before. I knew better. Once you're addicted, you can't just turn it off for a couple of days and be a mom to a 3-year-old. That is not an easy time to be a mom. 3-year-olds are hard work. And so trying to maintain an addiction and a mom was not even realistic. I ended up going to rehab again and staying there and doing an outpatient program for a while, and then relapsing and getting kicked out of that program. I was living in I did the inpatient rehab, and then I was able to move into they had like an apartment complex. And so you could do like an outpatient. So you would do these classes and you could stay in this housing with, you know, other people in the program, and able to work yourself back into independent life. But of course, there are criteria. You can't be using and staying in a recovery, you know, outpatient program with other people in recovery. So I was still trying to self-medicate, and I wasn't taking the commitment to be clean serious, and I relapsed again, and I got kicked out. And I was dating somebody at the time, and so I moved in and began using heroin again. And that was when my overdoses began happening. So this is like 2016 was when my addiction really got the worst of me. January of 2017, I don't even know how many times I've overdosed. I know that I have been told of some of them. They were, I don't even know if you could call them minor, but where somebody said, yeah, we didn't know if you were going to make it, kind of thing. And like, Lord willing, I did, because one of those times was at my drug dealer's house, and I know he's not going to call to get you help at his house when he supplied it to you. He probably would have dumped me in a dumpster if I hadn't made it. Those people don't care, you know. But so, January, yeah.
Bethany, can you clarify, because for some of our listeners, the understanding of an overdose is that you do die. So I guess if you overdose and you don't die, what kind of, define that for us?
So I think it's more being a state of unconsciousness. For some people, it looks a lot worse than for other people. It just kind of depends on the severity of the overdose. It's like they can't wake you up. So heroin addiction, you're often like nodding out. It's a downer. So that's like when you feel good is when you're like nodding out is what an
Like
addict
falling
would
asleep.
call it. Yeah, like just kind of
Okay.
sitting there dozing in and out, not even in a state of consciousness, but you feel incredible, but to everybody else, you can't even stay awake. There's something wrong. And you could be standing up and nodding out. It's just very, very bizarre. It's zombie-like.
And so
So
you said you're not sure how many times, I mean, 5, 15, 50. And
no, I would say only a handful of times.
were you hospitalized, or was this just at other people's houses, at your own house, or a combination of things?
So I was only hospitalized one of the times. The other times, that's why I said there's like the severity is so different. So obviously I came to for a few of the times that I was told about. One of the times they were not able to get me to come to, so they did call, my ex at the time did call 911, and this was how I got my CPS case. They called 911 and EMS came. They had to do 3 shots of Narcan, and Narcan does the reverse effect of what the heroin drug is doing to your body. And it didn't work the first 2 times, so they had to do a 3rd dose. That's how strong into my state of unconsciousness, I guess you could say, I was. And they said that I wasn't even breathing at the time. They were like, you weren't even breathing. We didn't know if you were going to make it. And so I was still like in this mentality. It was just my ex and I there at the time. My daughter was not there. She was at her dad's. But because the EMS workers could tell that a child lived there, they saw all her toys and stuff around. So they did end up calling CPS on me. And I didn't find out about that until like days later when
And that's Child Protective Services, correct?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Mhm.
So then I got called by the caseworker, and that's how I was alerted to that. So I was taken to the hospital because I said, no, I'm fine. I can walk. I'm totally fine. Like I felt normal because the Narcan had reversed the effects of the drugs on my body. So I felt like I was normal. So I was like, no, I don't need to go to the hospital. I'm totally fine. And they said, well, if you don't go to the hospital, then we're going to call the cops and have you arrested for possession. So I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. I'll go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and that's like what still like boggles me is I went to the hospital and then they didn't charge me. It just doesn't make sense to me, like why they still wouldn't charge me. But anyways, so I went to the hospital and I ended up convincing the hospital people to discharge me. They said my vitals are fine, and I signed a paper saying that I was leaving without doctors, like the doctors advised that I stay,
Yeah.
but you can sign a form that says, like I'm leaving under my terms kind of thing. And I left, and I did not learn my lesson because I was leaving knowing that I had a crack pipe at home and more heroin to use. And I wanted to get high because that felt good. And that was stressful with the EMS, and that hospital was stressful. And so I deserved to feel good again after that. I was not like, your mentality is just so berserk. It does not even make sense. So I left and I continued to use. So in the time at that part of that overdose, people in my NA community found out, and my sponsor, who I had been very close to, and she was like family to me, like close to my parents with how long that we'd been connected. So she didn't know that I survived that overdose. She actually called my dad, and that's how my parents found out that I was using heroin. She called my dad and said, I'm so sorry. I'm calling with my condolences on the passing of Bethany. And my dad at the time did not know that I was using like that. He didn't know that I was using heroin, and he thought I was dead. And so it was like hours later that he found out that I had survived that overdose, but he actually he will share about it in his testimony. We've given our testimony before at churches, and he grieved that I was dead. Like he thought that I was not alive anymore because of that phone call. So my family got very concerned, and they were trying to convince me from that day forward, like, you need to go back to rehab. You need to get your life together. You need to go back to rehab. And I was like, oh, I can do it on my own. I can do it on my own. And I proceeded to spend the next couple weeks trying to detox myself at home. But mentally, the addiction was so strong that I couldn't get out of those obsessive thoughts, and I couldn't stay away. I mentally couldn't stay away. I couldn't fight through the physical withdrawals, and I couldn't fight through the mental obsession of, it's not, like, I need that, I need that, I need that. And I was in so much pain mentally and emotionally and just empty. So I didn't.
Bethany, at any of these points, did you ever say to God, like, help me, I cannot do this on my own. I cannot do this without you. This hurts. Help me. Please help me. Or were you not there yet with God? That's what you meant. You weren't in a personal relationship yet.
No. And I was actually really angry with God at that point. I was like, at this, I want nothing to do with God. I wouldn't have even prayed to him to help me get out of that scenario. In my mindset at that point, I was like, how could a loving God allow these things to happen to me? How could a loving God allow me to struggle with this mental health since I was a teenager when I didn't do anything to deserve it? How could a God, why would I choose to serve a God that's going to let me have this addictive personality? I'm divorced, which was like a huge no-no growing up. God is against divorce. You do not get divorced. It's not an option. So at that point, I was divorced. I was sharing my child. I was like, I want nothing to do with this God because he clearly does not have my back. No, praying to God was not even an option at that point.
So everybody, I need to interject with some real life stuff here. As we're recording this, we're running up against the time that I need to leave and go get my children from school. So you will see me exiting the interview. And Bethany, I just wanted to say, God bless you. I am so excited for the end of this redemptive story, because we know that God is going to show up in a big way for you, because your life is completely transformed. And so listeners, hang in there. Love you girls, and keep going.
Okay. See you. Alice. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Oh My God Pod with Hollis Moore and Lori Spiker. We want you to know that God desires a relationship with you, just like a trusted friend.
Our desire for you is to find hope, inspiration, and connection through today's story. And we hope that you will experience God in your own unique way too. Stay connected and share your stories by joining our Facebook group, visiting our website, ohmygodpod.com, and of course, subscribing to the podcast. And remember, oh my God is awesome.